good time zone. And a happy birthday to all of those around the world. We're finally back with reading Terra: A Journey. And this week has certainly been a journey. We had a stream on Monday, and then immediately after stream, I broke my monitor. So, had to order a new one. Rush ordered, of course. I could have maybe streamed with one monitor, but felt like a hassle. Couldn't be bothered. Didn't want to move the monitors around or anything like that either. So I was like, I'll just wait until the new one gets here. 2 days off, whatever. Cut to yesterday. The monitor gets here. It's the wrong one. Or rather, it's technically the one I got, but I got the wrong one. Because all the monitors in like the brand, like the sub brand, it's Asus I was looking at. All the monitors are like, all their names are not anything rememberable or easy to discern. It's all just a bunch of alphanumeric strings. And I found out that the alphanumeric strings actually do like mean stuff. At least I found out part of what they mean over time. But you can easily confuse two monitors that look exactly the same, but have slightly different features because one number or one letter in the name is different. So yeah, the one I got was the wrong one because it's confusing. I got one that had a VGA port, which first of all, I'm shocked that they still make monitors with VGA ports. But I won't complain that these companies are continuing to allow people to have VGA ports. I support, the continued use of technology. So like, if someone out there needs a VGA port, hey, we still make them. That's cool. I do not. I need HDMIs and display ports. So, yeah. Had to return that. And now I'm waiting for the actual one that I hope is actually the one. And I didn't get it confused again. But that won't be here until the weekend. I would have bought the same monitor I had, the one that broke, but they don't seem to make it anymore. In fact, the company Viotech doesn't even necessarily seem to exist anymore because even their website doesn't sell anything, it seemed like. So unfortunately, I couldn't just rebuy what exactly I liked. I had to find the next closest thing, which was easier said than done. I don't have a lot of requirements, but I do have some requirements. Not big on like huge monitors, so it's nothing crazy. And I do like having a built-in speakers in case of emergencies or in case I need it. Sometimes I do. It does happen. But I digress. That's where I've been. But the monitor isn't here yet, right? But I realized, you know what? I only need one monitor for this stream. This stream reading Terra Journey only needs one monitor, so actually I figured might as well do it while I can't do anything else. And this week I also got some studio lighting. Yes, I caved. I got one guide last time we had this stream, and I decided to actually try and get a better, slightly more professional setup. Is it perfect? No, but as a hobbyist, it's better. I do think it's better. I also switched. Well, I was using a different capture software for the camera. Now I'm capturing directly through OBS, and I think it actually is better. I think that software, even though it was like the camera software, it wasn't actually as like something was wrong with it. I think it wasn't as clear. I think it's more clear directly through OBS. And of course, the lights, the key lights help. Not perfect. I also don't know. I've spent the past 2 days experimenting with the lighting and trying to make sure it worked and setting it up, and so I'm not 100% positive on like the best placement of all the lights, but I think it's good enough. Certainly more readable on screen, I think. So that's where I was. Bam. We were left off on chapter 4, which is all about races. And you know what happened this week as well? I crashed out in infield. Speaking of races, let's talk about infield races. So, if you play infield, you might know that right now there's a little event, Carly's Fairy Tale, which you have to take pictures in specific spots with specific requirements. And one of those requirements a couple days ago was to have a lung operator in the picture. I was like, okay, sure, there's 2 lung operators, Chen and Zhuang. I'll pull out Zhuang, take a picture. It wasn't working. The requirement wasn't being fulfilled. And I was like, well, that's strange. What's going on there? Turns out Zhuang isn't a lung, and I crashed out. Apparently Zhuang this whole time, no one said anything. I didn't hear anyone talk about this. Zhuang has been a Killin or Kylan. I think I'm gonna go with Kylan for now until someone says otherwise, but she's not a lung, even though she looks exactly like a lung, and I don't know what's going on in infield anymore. First there was Ardashir, which people did talk about, and there's Mifu, which people did talk about, who, by the way, looks like a Kylan, but isn't. And now, this whole time, I just blissfully assumed Zhuang Fengyi was a lung, and she's not. Even though she sure looks like one. I don't know. I I've given up, I guess. Who knows what the future holds. Next they're gonna tell me Dapan is a koala or something. I don't know. Camille with his angel halo. Why does he have a halo? I don't know. I just can't believe it. I just can't believe the character who looked like a Kylan isn't, and then the other character is. I think that made it even worse. Everyone has a halo now? Yeah. So now we can go back to Arknights with when races made sense. We're probably halfway through chapter 4, I think. Last time we had read about the Voivra, Manticores, all the other stuff. Learned about the difference between elders and ancients a little more, which is a very actually political. Learned about like how races categorize themselves and why they are grouped the way they are, which is also a bit political. Which is why, you know, weasels are still considered cats, feline race, instead of their own race, because they just consider themselves feline still. But we are starting with the Savra. All of the lizard peoples. So, the Savra make their homes in the desert. Most of them live in Sargon, with some having migrated to Rimbiliton. They prefer sun-drenched places where they can bask in sunlight for extended periods. But then again, who doesn't? The Savra are a race with scales covering their bodies and tails. They are agile and sharp-eyed, almost natural-born hunters. The majority of Savra are covered head to toe in scales and can change the color of them. Really. With the right clothing, they can blend seamlessly into their surroundings, such as deserts or barrens. They're all chameleons? Is this a thing? Most people know two things about Savra. They hail from Sargon, and they have long lifespans. While both are true, they have unfortunately been exaggerated in popular culture. The old Sargonian hunter, puffing on a cigar and telling cruel and cunning jokes with a crooked grin, has become a stereotype of this race in some local legends. And as you might expect, most of these depictions are fictional. In Sargonian folklore, elder Savra are regarded as embodiments of wisdom, and rightly so. Savra have a habit of sunbathing while engaging in solitary contemplation. With years of deep thought and over a century of life experience, of course, their advice is the most priceless value. I know Victorian Savra, a Mr. Angst of Caledon, who has walked these lands for over a century and a half. As a man in my 90s, still spry and clear-headed, I still find it hard to imagine living such a long life. Man, Erikson is 90? Damn. He served a council member until just last year. His insight into Orangenium industrial development strategies were incredibly enlightening. In fact, he changed my own views on the industry, forcing me to acknowledge my past mistakes. I wish him good health and good fortune. May he enjoy a happy retirement. The majority of Savra can change the color of their scales. That's fascinating. And yeah, Savra long-lived. Famously, there was that Savra in A Walk in Dust, which was like 3 centuries old or something. Maybe even more. Knew the old Emperor of Sargon and everything. My thanks to this gentleman from Rhodes Island for allowing me to use his likeness in the book. Looks like he's at exactly 100 centimeters, which... Nope, that's 180. I was going to say 100 centimeters is really short. 180 centimeters. The green text, that bright green text is hard to read. You can't even see it, pretty much. It's very hard to read. 180 makes more sense. Zalix. The Zalek population is sizable, even compared to the felines or Liberi. They are widely dispersed across Terra, from Bolivar to Rimbiliton. In recent years, there is also a significant number of Zaleks who have chosen to live in Colombia. Zaleks are typically characterized by a pair of prominent round ears on their heads. For a small portion of Zaleks, these ears can appear pointed due to tufts of hair. These tufts grow not from the scalp, but directly from the ears, so they are commonly known as ear tufts. I have ear tufts. A small number of felines also share this trait. Zaleks living in Kazimierz Yerig region often have thicker ear tufts and large fluffy tails. By contrast, in warmer climates further south, the hair on their ears and tails tend to be finer. Zaleks are relatively small in stature compared to other Terrans, but they are fairly agile. They often possess excellent hearing and quick reflexes, making them highly sensitive to vibrations in the air and changes in airflow, which is why many of them work as messengers. Similarly, many Zaleks are found among catastrophe messengers. I feel like that's a redundant sentence, but whatever. Notably, a recent wave of Zalek celebrities have emerged in Colombian film industries, including figures such as Bernd Gailey, Anthony Elvin, and Magda Quicktongue Molinsky of Kazimierz. In the 1094 comedy Come On, Not Again, Gailey played the lead role of Jack Scottner, offering a subversive reinterpretation of the classic work Winged Legend. He convincingly portrayed a humble hero who, despite inner turmoil, ultimately made the right choices. The film was widely acclaimed and helped reshape the negative connotations of the term Zaleks hoarding, transforming it from hoarding useless things out of greediness to saving things up with foresight for family and friends. It has also directly inspired a large number of Zaleks who participate in pioneering expeditions. Their wilderness survival skills have become a frequent topic of discussion in the media. So they do have the like pack rat stereotype. My thanks to the gentleman from Yerig for allowing me to use his likeness in the book. Good old Yucatan. And then we go to Durin, which is a bit of a strange jump. Most people see the Durins as a mysterious group. These short, pointy-eared individuals occasionally visit cities and settlements, but rarely mention where they come from. Historical records from different regions mention the Durins sporadically, but it is only in the past century that people have started piecing together details about their society and culture. Many still believe that the Durins are sufferers of some disease and that their generally short stature is a result of illness contracted during childhood. However, this seemingly logical assumption is entirely rumor. While it is true that Durins are shorter on average compared to other races, it has nothing to do with any malady. These baseless rumors are hindered a true understanding of the Durins. Durin society is organized into what they call cities, and these settlements are scattered beneath the surface of Terra. Each city is a marvel of modern science. The technology used to build and maintain these cities far surpasses that of surface dwellers. Each city has its own unique social structure and culture, but the Durins have developed their own way of maintaining smooth communication. A small number of Durins are willing to leave the underground and start a different life on the surface. Surprisingly, throughout Terra's long history, those Durins have rarely revealed their origins to people living on the surface. Current research suggests that the Durins mastered advanced technology long ago, but they show no interest in using their resources to interfere with the surface world. Multiple Durins have casually stated that surface society is interesting, hinting at curiosity as their motive for visiting the world above ground, yet these offhand comments leave much unanswered. So, did not go into it, but we do know that the origin of Durin is tied to the Sarkaz. They are a Sarkaz offshoot species who moved underground in search of ancient technology, and presumably found that ancient technology, which is why their cities are quote-unquote more advanced. But yeah, they are, and presumably they're short because of living underground. They just evolved to be shorter, I would assume. This guy is 100 and just over 100, 135 centimeters. No credit. Who knows who this guy is? And then we go to Ceratos. Now this one will be interesting. We only have one Cerato character. Don't know anything about them. The rhinoceroses. Rhinos. The Ceratos are one of the many tribes originally inhabiting the oases of Sargon. They are known for their strong and robust physiques. In the past century, Ceratos, tall and powerful, have begun to appear in other regions of Terra. Like the Karanta, the Ceratos are skilled runners. They do not often travel long distance. But they do not often travel long distance. A common belief, which is also widely accepted among the Ceratos, is that their large size and weight demanded far more energy for extended activity compared to other races. In other words, long journeys may not be worth the effort for them. The Ceratos place great value on their horns, but they do so in a unique way. Since the tribal era, horns have been an important weapon for the Ceratos. They sharpen their horns by engaging in face-to-face short-range charges, seeing this as a way of regular maintenance. What might seem like a brutal clash to outsiders may be nothing more than a game to them. In recent years, some Seratos have chosen to add armor to their horns to further increase their strength. The Serato tribes of Sargon maintain a traditional hobby of raising foul beasts. This is a particular species of foul beast in the Oasis region that seems to have a natural affinity for the Seratos. A Serato might have several of these foul beasts, and it is common to see elderly Seratos taking their feathered companions for a walk around the neighborhood. That is a funny reference to those birds that hang out on rhinos' backs to like eat, I guess, parasites and stuff. Cute. I want to know, though, what I want to know is, are the horns on a Serato made from hair like they are on a rhinoceros? Isn't that a thing? Because that kind of, I mean, that'd be kind of weird for like a human. They just have hair growing out of their forehead like that, and it's, you know, weirder than like a normal horn, I feel like. Yeah, the horn's made of keratin. So, hair or fingernails, as they say. Which is different. There's a whole science of horn categorization, which we did go through on stream once upon a time for another topic. Because what actually is a horn and what isn't? Are keratin horns normal horns? Is this just a normal horn and I'm overthinking it? So a horn has a bone core covered in keratin. But rhinoceros horns are just made of keratin without the bone core. So they're not an actual horn, right? Okay, so it's the bone core. Yeah, they don't have a bone core. Otherwise, it is the same substance pretty much. It's not as weird. Fair enough. Now we have the Anura, the frogs. We also have only one Anura character still, Blue Poison. Oh, also special thanks to the young lady from Rhodes Island for allowing me to use her likeness in this book. It's actually surprising how rare frogs and or amphibians are. I don't know if amphibians are grouped up with Savra and the Anura are just different, or if Anura are also other amphibians. I'm not actually sure about that. We don't really... I can't think of like any amphibious character. There must be someone who's amphibious, right? I don't know. I can only think of Blue Poison. Well, the Anuras, who chiefly reside in Sargon and Bolivar, are a relatively rare presence, and most Terrans, often from other regions, know little about them. The Anuras prefer humid, water-rich environments and those who have moved to nomadic cities in recent years tend to choose the ones with ample greenery and well-managed waterways. Oh, I don't blame them. In ancient times, Anuras were few in number and lived deep within remote rainforests. Outsiders rarely encountered them. As a result, the Anuras inevitably became the subject of myth-making. The Sargonian court has long believed that the mysterious, elegant Anuras must be very wise. For centuries, they have been inviting Anuras from the rainforest tribes to serve in key positions in Shar Agada, a practice that continues to this day. Oh snap! Maybe we'll see some in the next Sargon event. That'd be nice. The Archosaurias, who also dwell in the rainforest, have maintained a good relationship with the Anuras over the years. The physically strong Archosaurias often help the Anuras build homes and other structures, while the Anuras take care of the village planning and decoration. Moreover, the Archosaurias and Anuras often host joint swimming competitions as part of their festival celebrations. But no Anura has appeared in any of the Akawala events. Most Anuras have inherited Orange Name arts related to stealth and invisibility. That's cool. While a smaller number can use their naturally secreted toxins as powerful weapons against enemies. People who are somewhat familiar with this concept might worry that even brief contact with the Anuras could lead to severe poisoning. However, this worry is completely unfounded. Anuras have full control over the secretion and use of their toxins. Yeah, so Anuras are just frogs and stuff. But other amphibians, yeah, are there other... Are the other amphibians just part of Savra? Are there other amphibians? Oh yeah, they are, because Asbestos is a salamander, isn't she? Salamanders are amphibians, right? Am I crazy? Yeah, salamanders are amphibians. So yeah, so Savra have other amphibians, but frogs are their own thing. Yeah, I was like, there must be someone who's an amphibian. Yeah, Asbestos. I think they're the only one. Oh, but you know what? Ethan being able to change his scales, although he is based off of Chameleon, I guess that's just a thing because he is a Savra. So that's interesting. I would imagine, you know, we talked about that, the scale thing. I would imagine salamanders, I don't know if there are any amphibians that can change their color. There probably are. But maybe that would be something that was like, okay, yeah, so some Savra, if they don't, then those Savra are probably actually amphibians or specific types of amphibians. Of course, not all lizards change their colors, but it seems apparently most Savra can. And speaking of Archosauria, of course, my thanks to this young lady from Rhode Island for letting me use her likeness in the book. Archosaurias, known for their worship of strength and their tails, make their home in the rainforest, primarily in the humid regions of eastern Sargon. Here they live in tribes along riverbanks, their culture deeply rooted in the surrounding environments. The Archosauria tribes of the eastern Sargonian rainforest engage in many tail-based competitions. Unlike most other tailed races, they prioritize function over aesthetics. While others may focus on the beauty of tails, the Archosaurians emphasize their power. For example, they prefer pure strength competitions such as log dragging. The Archosaurians who drag the most logs win. This is just one of the many tail competitions in which the Archosaurians engage. In recent years, with the influence of foreign cultures, a new sport has become popular among local youths. Young Archosaurians use their tails to shoot a ball into the opponent's goal. The Archosaurians often exhibit great confidence in their abilities. Many proudly refer to themselves as Tiaqua, meaning brave and vigilant warriors. This proud identity has been passed down since the Golden Age of Sargon. Credible records suggest that the ancient Sargonian emperor first bestowed their recognition upon Archosauria warriors. Archosaurians are also natural-born swimmers. This allows them to ambush enemies or prey from the water. The Archosaurians who leave the rainforest are often seen as pure warriors, yet few know of their unmatched aquatic agility. I've never thought about that, but it would make sense. Oops. Of course, this is a thick tail stream, so all thin tails better turn it off. No thanks to this woman whom is about 160 centimeters. Itra. Another rare race. The Itras primarily live in cold highlands or near the ice fields of Terra. They are often seen in parts of Yin, Yerig, Ursus, and Sami, but are hardly found in other regions. The Itras closely resemble the Capernae, Elafias, and Carantas. The main difference between the Itras and the other two is that Itras do not grow horns, and they are not quite as physically strong as Carantas. It is said that the ancestors of the Itras had long, sharp teeth, but this trait has become less noticeable over time. That's a pity, man. That'd be cool if they had sharp teeth. The cold, harsh, dangerous environment in which they live has made the Itras a cautious and wary race. In many areas, they are still fairly xenophobic. Even in modern cities, many Itras choose to live reclusive lives, avoiding social interaction. Therefore, if an Itras opens up to you, it indicates that your relationship is truly special. The Itras of Yerig have been among the first to worship Yerigander, and they have played a significant role in the spread of Yerigander worship throughout history. Many scriptures and religious texts were written and compiled by Itras. Interesting. My thanks to this messenger from Yerig for allowing me to use his likeness in the book. Also, the xenophobic thing is very interesting. Many of them are xenophobic. Kind of yikes. Kind of yikes, guys. Shame about the teeth. Next up, we've got two that don't have pictures for some reason. The Petrums, which I believe are the turtles, which again we have one character for. The Petrums are an extremely rare race, so much so that many have simply never heard of them. In fact, most Petrums live in isolated regions abundant with water. Not A-gear though, right? They're not A-gear, they're their own thing. came up separately, especially since Aegir were completely isolated pretty much. The Petrums have a highly unique physiology lacking any prominent features like tails, horns, or scales, and they rarely appear in public. Contemporary scholarship on the Petrums is extremely limited, with some researchers even doubting their very existence. To which Calcit writes, this is because they are highly assimilated with Oranginium, which has transformed their bodies in significant ways. Yeah. There you go. So, as we know, that Oranginium evolved the races into human forms. So the more assimilated they are, the more human they become. So Petrums are actually highly assimilated, so they don't have any characteristics. But they are turtles, which I guess we only know because of the artwork. But yeah, they don't have even scales or anything. But that makes me wonder if Archosauria are perhaps have a higher unassimilation, right? Because there's a lot of Archosauria who are anthropomorphic. A lot of them. So I wonder if their race is just much less assimilated than others. And I wonder what caused that. Like, why are Petrum, who are super rare, more assimilated? How did that happen? Very interesting. Most Petrum settlements possess advanced smelting and production techniques, unknown to outsiders. Among the Petrums are many skilled craftsmen and material experts, even though they may not have formal education in modern science. According to historical records from ancient Sargon, the metals and materials produced by the Petrums were of exceptional quality, yet they refused to share their techniques and knowledge with the Lords Amir. I visited some Petrum villages along the coasts of Yen, Victoria, and Iberia. In these places, the Petrums have close relationships to the shore-dwelling Aegir. They sometimes even refer to each other as kin. Okay. This phenomenon is unprecedented among other races, or at least it has never been recorded. There are many academic theories about this, but none have been universally accepted as conclusive. Okay, well, I kind of stand corrected on that then. So the land-dwelling Aegir do associate with them, actually. Which also I assume then, like the Aegir also don't really have many traits. We do have Adriana with her tentacles. Some of them have pointed ears. So that to me makes it seem like, okay, Aegir are like more assimilated to Oranginium. Which I think fits. It's interesting, there's not Oranginium like really in the ocean, but their history as the inheritors of the predecessors does definitely lends to them having been made more assimilated. But not completely. Not completely. like to see some more Petrums. So they've got villages along the coastline. And then we have the Anati, which I actually forget what the Anati are. They don't have a picture, so I'm not sure. The Anatis, a race that lives long, or that's long rather, not lives long, that's long been associated with the mountains, are common presence on this land. Common presence, yet there's no picture? For a long time they lived in mountain regions, far from the plains, and warmly welcomed any visitors they had. Anatis are nimble. They can traverse rugged mountain terrain that most people find impassable, as if they were flat ground. This ability has made them the go-to professionals for trade and courier services in many places. With the rise of nomadic cities, their business has shifted from the mountains to the nomadic plates. Some Anati groups live in remote areas, maintain a strict coming-of-age tradition where the seniors send those to remote areas to maintain... where seniors send those about to reach adulthood to a desolate mountain to survive on their own for a period of time. Though this trial may seem harsh to outsiders, the tradition carries practical wisdom, teaches them how to survive on a catastrophe-prone land. Those Anatis who still live in the mountains often carve unique cave dwellings into the mountainside. These homes differ from the buildings we see in nomadic cities or other settlements. The entire cave system is built into the mountain, with more emphasis on excavation than construction. Oh wait, she's an Anati? Oh, the Anati are raccoons. Why is she over here? She should be over here. That's weird. And then we have Pilosa. I must admit, I have never seen a Pilosa in person, as they are easily mistaken for other races and rarely seen in public. Over the past few decades, my colleagues have collected very few information related to the Pilosas, making it even more difficult to draw any conclusion. I'm including this here only because they are indeed historical records of this race. Today we apprehended a nondescript individual who was attempting to climb over the barbed wire fence into the administration building. During interrogation, the suspect admitted that he intended to sneak into management office to delete his records of previous violations against safety regulations to avoid being fined. Upon further inspection, the suspect was identified as Pilosa miner Liam McLean. He was caught stuck at the top of the barbed wire fence due to his excessive slowness in the movements and reaction. Given that he has admitted his mistakes and caused no property damage, we decided to reassign him to the logistics center for a different job. Of course, he still has to pay the fine for not wearing a helmet. Excerpt from Monthly Safety Report, July 1053 Mine Safety Records. Abandoned on the battlefield during due to his sluggish pace, the once slow and disgraced fighter rises to become a renowned Pilosa swordsman. Though his nature may have cost him speed, it has granted him something far more precious, a profound understanding of why he wields a sword. His slow EI slash is an unstoppable force, even against the strongest foes. Excerpt from Nama Kengo Hai Kai Hin, a Higashinese comic published in 1086. The Pelosa are sloths. Don't know why she's over here, though. It's not like there's not room. Seems like a slight formatting mistake there. So the Pelosa are known for being slow, which, not the best trait to have. I wonder if their metabolic rate is actually equivalent to a sloth or not. How does that work? We have a note down here, different handwriting, so I don't think it counts it. In fact, the Rhodes Island scene is a Pelosa. Yes. Pelosa do tend to be a bit slow in their actions, but the upside is that they are very meticulous and their work is always of high quality. According to Scene herself, they are often viewed as outliers due to their quiet and reserved nature. However, they do have quite a few distant relatives scattered across Terra. Rhodes Island HR Department. The mysterious Rhodes Island HR. Draco and Lung. These are big sections. Speaking of lung. Surprised there's no pictures. Starting with the Draco. Dracos are a race of elders who have played a significant role in Terran history. They are few in number and scattered across Terra. Each group of Dracos exhibits distinct regional characteristics. Dracos are often protagonists of myth and legends, frequently depicted as heroic figures or rulers in ancient stories that are usually believed to be adaptations of historical events. For example, there is one story about a Draco hegemon from the tribal era who considered other horned races as a threat. He would saw off their horns of his slaves, grinding them into powder to maintain his own horns, which he believed to be his natural crown. Another story, that's gruesome, by the way. Another story tells of an immortal red dragon tyrant who has lived to the present day, appearing every few millennia to bring harm to the people. There is also the tale of the ancient king of Victoria who hid all of the Orangenium artifacts he had plundered in a vault or perhaps multiple vaults, which remains a popular topic among treasure hunters. Some legends are even more fantastical, claiming that certain Dracos can fly without the use of arts or breathe fire at will, abilities that contradict our current understanding. Well, they do have fire arts, at least the Victorian ones do. Don't know about flying, though. The history of Victoria's Dracos, Draco monarchy, seems to support the idea that they have been leaders in many regions since ancient times. Stories and ballads have traveled even further than the Dracos themselves. Most Terrans first hear these legends in childhood. The aforementioned story of the immortal red dragon tyrant is one such tale used to frighten children and make them behave. Although many people go through their entire lives without ever meeting a Draco, they certainly have imagined them at some point. In reality, Dracos are not great in number, but they typically possess intricate horns and tails that make them quite distinctive, even in a crowd. You say that, but most Dracos seem to be mistaken with Voivra. from what we've seen in game. Over the past century, increased communication between Terra's nations and races has revealed that Dracos do indeed have advantages in Orangenium arts of simulation and other physical traits. It seems that the legendary image of the Draco is not solely due to the influence of storytelling, but has some basis in reality. On the other hand, the connection between the term Draco and the identity associated with it was once extremely loose, and it was only within the last 1,000 years that a common understanding of this powerful race began to take shape among the core nations. This also explains why the legends surrounding them are so varied and complex. The various Draco groups share common traits, but they also have notable differences. For instance, the House of the Dragon not to be mistaken with the TV show or the books. The House of the Dragon that once shared power with the Lion Kings in Londinium, not to be confused with the movie, and the King Gale bloodline of Terra are so different that anyone familiar with Victorian history would not easily confuse the two. Therefore, many questions remain as to whether the term Draco as a collective designation is appropriate, and many people tend to refer to them differently based on local history and custom. So the House of Dragons that ruled over Victoria is different from the Terran bloodline. I did not realize that. I thought they were the same. So there's 2 Draco bloodlines, actually. Learned something new. And the Lung, which are, of course, Eastern dragons. The Lungs are a race of elders unique to Yen. For thousands of years, they have lived in the East, where they forged an ancient civilization and ruled over a prosperous and enlightened empire. Wherever the Lungs are mentioned, the founder of the Yenese imperial family, the True Lung, remains an inescapable figure. His profound influence on Yen is undeniable. The nation is named after him. The Yenese Empire have inherited his title of True Lung, or the Yenese Emperors, and the imperial household refer to themselves as the House of the True Lung. While the origins of most civilizations on Terra are clouded by mysterious ballads and legends, Yen is an outlier with her large archive of written records that detail the history of Yen the True Lung and his successors, who led the peoples as they expanded their territories and built shrines to their gods. So we already learned something. Yen is named after a person named Yen. If we consider the history of the True Lung as factual, then the Lungs might be the most ancient branch of modern humanity, and the history of Terran civilization would extend to unimaginable lengths. In fact, many other Lungs besides the House of the True Lung also live in Yen. Although they are not of royal blood, they all claim Yen the True Lung as their ancestor. And they are all descendants of the House of Yen. In the term True Lung, the word true does not imply an opposing false, rather it expresses a profound respect for a common ancestor and legendary ruler. So all Lung consider themselves descendants of Yen. So Chen would be considered that as well. Of course, Chen is related to Wei, who is the brother of the current True Lung anyway. The Lungs cherish their history, with people of all ages knowing their ancestral stories and proudly treasuring these traditions. This is closely related to the Lungs of Yin's long-standing tradition of preserving history through written records. The Yinese court has established specialized institutions to collect, compile, and preserve historical documents. Works that record the origins of the various Yinese clans, such as the Investiture of Lungs, Study of 100 Families, Surnames, and the Calendar of 100 Families, are stored in archives designated by the Ministry of Rights and are considered official. Reliable histories endorsed by the Yinese government. Therefore, the history of the Lungs is more detailed and credible than the orally transmitted origins of other races on Terra. Very much based on, of course, Imperial China. I know the surname one especially, they have there's like a famous official book of surnames that all like surnames come from. Interestingly, during the first century of contact between the core nations and Yin, the Lungs of Yin referred to the Draco rulers as Lungs too. The misunderstanding arose because the Victorian translators, who had only a superficial understanding of Yinese culture, rashly used the Yinese word Lung to refer to the Draco kings when introducing them to the people of Yin. This led to the Lungs of Yin to believe for a long time that the part of their kind had been living in the distant west. This misconception persisted for nearly a century, but as interactions grew more frequent, Yinese Lungs realized that Dracos were entirely different from themselves. They even adopted a Yinese equivalent to Draco as the official term, though some names and titles had already become customary. So both dragons, but completely unrelated to each other. Ah, Kylan, of course, speaking of. The page doesn't want to sit flat for whatever reason. I actually am super interested in Kylan lore because we don't know, we haven't been told anything about them actually, so they're good at thunder arts, I guess. Lei Fa, and that's about it. The far eastern land of Yin has nurtured many unique races, with the Kylans being particularly noteworthy. Though few in number, they hold a highly esteemed position and have long been prominent in the courts and government's offices of Yin. The Kylans resemble the Alafias in appearance. Oh, do they now? Do they? However, as an elder race, they are much more engaged in worldly affairs than the somewhat reclusive Alafias. The Kylans have traditionally enjoyed a high level of prestige in Yinese society. Long before the 100 Clan Rebellion, the Kylans served as guards and casters within the House of Yin. According to legend, the House of Yin was once plagued by ferocious beasts, so they sent a Kylan caster, a profession historically known in Yin as Zhu, to suppress it. This caster performed a ritual by a great lake, causing lightning that was supposed to descend from the sky to rise from the lake instead. The beast, fearing this power, dared not cross the lake, which became known as the Leiche Thunder Pool. To this day, the expression "lay not one foot into the Leiche" is still used. The exact location of the Leiche is now lost to history, but the Kylan caster's techniques of summoning lightning with Orangenium arts has been passed down and is known as Lei Fa. This unique branch of Orangenium arts was once exclusively held by the descendants of this Kylan caster, who took their ancestors' profession as their family name, becoming the Zuz, or however that should be pronounced. When the Chulung found the Tiansha bureaus to attract and nurture talent, some of the first instructor Tianshas appointed were descendants of the Zhu clan. Or Ju? Might be Ju? I don't know. This was tasked with they were tasked with teaching their ancestral Lei Fa to promising disciples. Thus, this art was no longer exclusive to the Zuz or the Kylans. It became available to any race. Not all Kylans are casters or instructor Tianshas like the Zuz. There are many other prominent families, such as the Lins and the Fas, who also claim close ties to the Chulung. We know Lin. Throughout history, Kylans have held high positions in the courts of the Chulung. The various Kylan clans have preferred roles in safeguarding justice, and they seem to have a long-established unspoken understanding with the court in this preference. This is how the Kylan gradually became a symbol of protection and peace to the people of Yen. Yeah, so Lin is Leize Lin, not that. So she's actually is from a very, very prominent family. That also doesn't mean her family name is Lin. Wasn't sure, never really thought about what part of her name was what, but that does confirm that the Lin is the family name. Wasn't sure what order they were, never thought about what order they were actually putting it in. They were doing the accurate order. Let me just do something real quick. So, Kylan resemble Alafia, huh? That scaled dragon tail, that's something that Alafias have, huh? That's a typical Alafian. I just can't, I don't know what's happening in Enfield. She literally has a dragon tail. She literally invented chubby lung. Why would, like, I thought the whole thing was because they're lung. That's not her? She didn't invent that after herself? How is she a Kylan? It doesn't make any sense. This is what a real Kylan looks like. Look at that. Fluffy, completely covered in fur, tail, horns. Yes, they have horns, this is true, but they're a different style of horn, not like the horn that Zhuang has, which is very much a horn that looks like lung horns. They're thinner, right? The lung horns are more similar kind of to antlers, I guess. They're thinner horn. Now, technically, antlers would make them more similar to a Lafia in that case, but they're thinner in that sense, but they don't also really branch as much. They usually have like maybe 1 or 2 branches, but you know, let's just look at some actual lung, like her. Look at that! Oh, look at that! A scaled dragon tail with a hairy ridge and a tuft at the end. Really? Curious. Very curious. And I could keep going. Oh, look at this one. Yeah, look at that. A scaled dragon tail. Now this one's interesting because she has like ears on her head. That's actually pretty unique. But a dragon tail with tufts of fur. Interesting, interesting. Now we know what to write on the next survey. Oh, the last survey, I actually brought it up. I didn't bring up Zhuang because I didn't know about Zhuang being a Kylan yet. I wish I did. But I did bring up the other characters. And it's like, I don't know what's going on, but like there's... Because they ask you like, oh, why did you pull for this character? Or why didn't you pull for this character? Was it, like, what did you think about their design and stuff? And so I was like, for Mifu, I was like, well, the design doesn't quite make sense with what the lore says. If I had known Zhuang was there, I would have mentioned something earlier. I would have mentioned Zhuang in the last, when she came out. I had no idea. I'd never even looked. Because I just safely assumed she looks 100% like a lung. She'd be a lung. Mifu doesn't look like a Sarkaz. Mifu, to me, looks more like a Kylan, but she's not completely 100% a Kylan. Like, her horns are a bit different, but, you know, that could just be phenotypage. She has a furry tail, which is something that no Sarkaz has. Which is what really sold it for me, that, oh, she must be a Kylan. Because of the furry tail, but... whatever. I think she's a slightly less egregious than actually Zhuang is. I think Zhuang is really egregious to try and pass her off as a Kylan. Like, the tail is just inexcusable. The tail is literally a lung tail. That's just insane to be like, no, no. She's not a dragon. No, no. rant. I won't rant too long and hard on that. Too much. Maybe a little. Aegir. The Aegir have traveled widely across Terra, inhabiting regions from coastal areas to the near lakes, rivers, and streams. In recent years, their legends have drawn increasing attention. Perhaps their origins is more complicated than we once imagined. The Aegir have many branches. While these branches share some common traits, they also exhibit stark differences in their physical characteristics. For instance, while most Aegir have an affinity for water, not all Aegirs possess the same level of aquatic abilities. I have encountered some Aegirs who can breathe underwater, but the majority of them cannot. Some of them can, though. Okay, I thought that used to be a thing many years ago. It was like, oh, can Aegir breathe underwater? And then it was said at some point, like, no, they can't. Some apparently can. Okay. But not most. The Aegirs are much more dependent on water than other humans in a variety of ways. Aegirs prefer to live near bodies of water, such as rivers, lakes, and even the seas that most Terrans fear. Let me just update the album. There we go. They also fear dehydration much more than any other race. You'd think that maybe the Anuras and amphibious Savra would also fear dehydration, now that they mention that. Their respiratory systems rely heavily on the moisture in the air, and their skin, when exposed to the elements, is prone to drying and cracking, which in severe cases can even threaten their lives. The Aegirs have been working on ways to combat this for a long time. For example, they use highly effective moisturizing agents to slow the evaporation of moisture from their bodies. In more extreme conditions, such as when an Aegir must venture deep into the deserts of Sargon, they use special distillation equipment to supply themselves with water, equipment that some desert dwellers have also begun employing. Using modern methods of analysis and cultural migration, which has been popular in racial studies in recent years, we find that unlike most Terran races who migrated from one place to several others, many Aegir spread inward from Terran's outer edges. Moreover, the Aegir legends of the Iberian Islanders and the Mitsuchi Fuchinohara. Not sure if the if the vowel around the F, if one of those vowels contracts or not. Mitsuchi Fuchinohara. Either way. Legend and Higashi seem to further corroborate their origins. A small vocal minority of origins studies scholars hypothesize that these Aegirs may have come from the ocean. They did. And we have talked about this during the Otto event with the Higashi Aegir, that like Higashi's actually really far from the coast if you look at the map, but they actually have a notable Aegir population, which is interesting. Like, it makes sense for coastal countries like Iberia, but Higashi's not actually coastal, according to the map. So it's interesting that they have such a notable population of it. But yes, if you don't know, Aegir came from the ocean. The Aegir civilization is the most advanced on Terra. like developing space flight 300 years before everyone else advanced. And for a long time they were isolationist, but are not isolationist anymore. I forget when this book was written. It's probably written before that happened, though. And then we have the Sancta. The more time you spend with the Sanctas, the more you can sense what makes them unique. I can't help but feel compelled to dedicate more pages to them, though I worry it might seem unfair. Still, I ask for my readers' indulgence as I offer some additional thoughts, which will also help explain some of my observations regarding Laterano in the following chapter. The halos over their heads and the wings of light behind their back symbolize the law that has protected them for millennia, allowing them to live lives that, while far from peaceful, are still governed by order in their homeland. The most well-known and mysterious trait of the Sancta is their empathy ability. Other races often speculate about this ability. Even I, after living in Laterano for several years, still find it intriguing. In truth, it is difficult for non-Sancta to fully grasp how this empathy works, and we can only glean a partial understanding from their descriptions. What I find particularly interesting is that Sanctas rarely, if ever, consciously engage their empathy in daily life. To them, it is more of an involuntary act, much like how other humans naturally observe each other's facial expressions during face-to-face interactions. The difference is that while our ability to read facial expressions is developed through social experience, the Sancta's empathy is something granted by the law. However, from this perspective, perhaps the Sancta's empathy is just another kind of facial expression that is invisible to the naked eye. Another hallmark of the Sancta is the guns they carry. These special devices are much more than mere weapons to the Sanctas. They are symbols of faith endowed by the law. As such, these lifelong companions are known as patron firearms, or informally guardian guns. Surprisingly, there is no rule that says every Sancta must keep a patron firearm. Nevertheless, in Laterano, every Sancta of sufficient age does have one, or even many. If you ask them why they carry a gun, they might respond, "Why not?" And I would agree. After all, what 12-year-old Sancta wouldn't want to have their own patron firearm? Or perhaps several. That's it. That's all the Sancta get. He said we're going to talk about their country, though, so we'll probably get more there. But I like how he didn't actually even try to describe the empathy. He just was like, yeah, it's weird. It's kind of maybe like a facial expression thing. He didn't explain like what it actually does to them or anything. But now the Sarkaz. The Sarkaz are one of the rarer races on Terra. That's an interesting way to describe them. Don't think I've ever heard anyone say they're rare. Like, they're pretty common, actually. They have varied appearances and have always been met with hostility by other races throughout human history. The Sarkaz have 10 prominent clans, collectively known as the 10 Kings Court. According to some Sarkaz, these clans are the cornerstone of modern Kazdal. Which, that's all underlined. Kaltsit has something to say about this. In fact, at their peak, there were over 100 different Sarkaz clans, Unfortunately, most of these were mercilessly exterminated over the years. Today, the 10 of the 10 kings refers to the gargoyles, vampires, Damatsis, Naxera, Cyclopses, Banshees, Liches, Wendigos, Revenant, and Jal. The Revenant are considered a clan, but they don't have a king. They're just a random group. That's interesting. I feel like that's a bit inaccurate, actually. The Diablos were once part of this ancient court, but they were removed after the extinction of their pure blood lineage. Thus, it can be reasonably deduced that with Boldrakas T's death, the Wendigos will eventually be removed from the royal court someday. Rest in peace, Boldrakas T. Rest in peace. I don't know if I consider the Revenants one of the court members at all, but okay. They just live in a furnace. Not even all of them, but... Because it was 10... Yeah, I don't know. That's... I really do think that's inaccurate. Because it was 10 because of the Diablos, but Diablos technically did die out. And then you have the Revenants. We talked about this in that one stream I did, but yeah, you have the Revenants, which are a group of Sarkaz who had died, but turned into a ghost-like existence thanks to Oranginium. So they're not a race. They don't have a bloodline. They don't like reproduce or anything. They're just specific individuals who became Revenants. Of course, you consider the Damatsi to be like, yeah, the Damatsi is not even specific individuals. The Damatsi is a specific individual, but the Damatsi are considered one of the pure-blooded clans in the court because they just are considered that. That is just a thing that's talked about. But yeah, they are the odd ones out in that regard because they aren't actually a specific bloodline. They're just a specific individual. But I would not include Revenants anywhere near that. Anyway, over 1,000 years of turmoil have left the Sarkaz divided, with the 10 Kings court on the brink of disintegration. Most people know only the Sarkaz clans of the court, but there are also a few non-court clans, such as the Goliaths, the Anasa, and the Oni. Interesting. Okay, so that's how they're going to include the Anasa and Oni. The majority of the Sarkaz are of mixed blood descent from different clans. Cruel, violent, dangerous, and barbaric, these were once the only qualities people associated with the Sarkaz, as if they were the evil given human form. However, in truth, no one is born evil, and the Sarkaz are no different. Other races imagine themselves as the bearers of justice and light, using this as an excuse to wage war against the Sarkaz. Even today, this prejudice remains. Throughout history, the Sarkaz have mostly led nomadic lives, and they are seldom share their culture with outsiders. Under these circumstances, many Sarkaz traditions have quickly faded away. Or quietly, even. The modern image of the Sarkaz mercenary is actually influenced by the tribe's long history of wandering. The Sarkaz are highly susceptible to oropathy, which many scholars attribute to their natural origin in arts of simulation. Others believe it stems from the hereditary transmission of arts within Sarkaz bloodlines. However, legends passed down among the Sarkaz place their ancestors, the Tikaz, in opposition to the elders and ancients. They view oropathy as a disease and curse inflicted upon them by their enemies. Yeah, so the Anasa and Oni they put here as just offhanded comments about as different non-court clans, which I guess is technically true. Right, they were Sarkaz offshoots who developed into their own race, like the Durin did. Obviously, this is the lore compendium, but it also is written from a specific perspective in universe. So the information is accurate to an extent. I wouldn't say it's necessarily inaccurate, except for maybe the Revenant thing here, and like maybe a few other little things here and there, kind of like interesting. But like he has Durin listed separately, and that's just because from his perspective and from the perspective of Terrans as a whole, the Durin, like they don't know much about the Durin, but we actually do know that the Durin are related to the Sarkaz. We now, like, Erikson does know that the Oni are as well, and the Anasa are directly related to the Sarkaz, so he does know that, but didn't give them enough word to be like, well, here's what makes them unique, because they are unique now. They have split off more, to the point where no one seems to ever talk about them being related to the Sarkaz, but Erikson does know they are. Conclusion. Reflecting on this chapter, I hope readers understand the modern society is the complex result of a long accumulation of history and coincidence. Many things that people take for granted in their daily lives are likewise worthy of serious discussion. Since the advent of the Crystal Age and the modern technology that comes with it, the disparities in physical ability between races have had less impact on daily life. And of course, in multiracial society, distinctions between members of the same race are also less significant. Although some researchers advocate for the detailed biological classification of Terra's races, such efforts hold little practical value in everyday life. And that's chapter 4. We didn't get every race, at least. Did we get every ancient race? I think we might have gotten at least every ancient. Let me check. We did not get some of the elders like the Kukulkans. But to be fair, those are pretty rare. Like, Erikson probably doesn't know about them, right? And that's why they're not included. But I think we actually did get everyone else. Looking back. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much just didn't get the Kukulkans. I know they mentioned some of the elder races in some of the ancient race sections previously, so pretty much a comprehensive look at the races. We didn't get a section for Oni or Anasa, which I think is a bit of a shame there. I feel like the Oni kind of do deserve to have their own section. Maybe the Anasa would be more offhanded, but Fair enough, fair enough. So chapter 5 is on the countries and regions of Terra. Now we get to hear what does E. Erikson think about some of the politics going on Terra? Let me just add in, because I wasn't sure what we were going to get to, so let me just add chapter 5 to this, since we are going to start chapter 5. Take a water break. All right. Chapter 5, Introduction. Beginning with the core. Complicated as it is when pertaining to the countries of Terra, we can do worse than a nice simple concept with which to wet our feet. Such footing will be steadier as we wade into the complications. The core of Terra happens to be a remarkably good starting point. It is no isolated concept. To know it is to know the modern Terra's perception of regional differences, cultural borders, political games, economic relations, and other such clashes in international communication. At present, people prefer to use the word core to refer to the central land belt of Terra. As a term, it often shows up alongside the names of a handful of other nations, but it has always been difficult to give an exact, clear-cut account of where this core starts and ends. When someone said the core in my childhood, they spoke of Victoria, Gaul, Latania, Iberia, and Laterano. At present time, Gaul has perished, Iberia's glory has faded, and the plucky upstart Ursus is now part of what many consider the core instead. On the other side, Kazimierz is a mighty nation all the while, and it certainly lies geographically closer than Ursus to the center of Terra. Many wars have flared between the two, with both sides claiming and ceding their share of victories, yet Kazimierz clearly does not stand as a core nation in the general sense. Rude. Or take another angle, Yen has consistently been the strongest and most important nation on this great land, but by all accounts has shown no inclination, the way Ursus has, to march for the core, so to speak. It may be that her long-standing policy of focusing on internal affairs instead of invading other nations has led to a disinterest in the core. The conclusion, then, is that compared to the rather vague explanation of Terra Center to the extent of influence exerted by some of Terra's mightiest nations, is more appropriate for what the core means in a daily context. To put it another way, the term doesn't present a pure geographical subdivision, but a more politically driven concept, in tune with the overall fluxes of power among governing entities. At the time of writing, the core specifically refers to the range of power exerted by the nations of Victoria, Latania, Ursus, Laterano, and Iberia. Iberia, still. Not Colombia? Interesting. I'd swap out Iberia and Colombia there. Iberia ain't exerting any influence. Interesting, okay. Of course, if you know anything about geopolitics in real life, core nations, peripheral nations, all that sort of thing is a real thing. People talk about. The many nations of Terra. In comparison to the core, nailing down a nation is undoubtedly much harder. Terra abounds with states and governments, leaving no surprise that different countries and regions might use that same word in subtly varied ways. To the residents of Victoria, the nation is a specific people and a set of reachable cities. To a Colombian, that which symbolizes a nation is a sempiternal. I don't know if I've ever seen that word in my life.
Sempiternal.
Sempiternal. Eternal. Why don't you just use eternal then? Sempiternal state of change. For those under the rule of several regimes in the Bolivarian region, the suggestion that the nation is a byword of public order could easily earn a baffled stare. Actually, you'll easily find abstract notions colliding and hence muddying one another anywhere. Lands such as Ursus and Minos have traditions of embodying their nations in human form and empowering or endowing those forms with their own personalities. Here, however, I will strictly discuss and analyze each nation from a political and institutional perspective. In light of this, I ask my readers focus particularly on the main facts in the following chapters. One's attention must not be distracted by the details. Accounts of the major nations of Terra will be given in this chapter. As is personal taste, I have refrained from unifying formats across each nation's profile. It is my belief readers will have a better feel for Terra's cultural diversity this way. All contents within the chapter serve as reference only, provided for the reader's perusal. Victoria, of course. Epigraph. In my first lesson of the comprehensive history of Terra, I encourage students to discuss their understanding of the different countries of Terra. Sparking a lively exchange of opinions, they passionately debated whether Sargon was too corrupt, Gaul too arrogant, Titania too reserved, Iberia too utilitarian, Ursus too barbaric, or Yen too discerning. An Auslan student suddenly asked, "What about Victoria? What is Victoria like?" Fortunately, I had my answer ready. Victoria is the starting point of our journey. Overview. Victoria, the dominant power in the core, wields unmatched military strength and economic influence. Her vast territory borders multiple core nations, frontier zones, and exclaves. Focused on expansion, the Victorian Empire seeks to establish an international order that protects her aristocracy's interests and secures political dominance by asserting her influence over other nations and exploiting frontier regions for resources. The Victorian nobility has amassed tremendous power and wealth through years of imperial expansion and hegemony, while the strength of the royal family has gradually declined. Official languages: Victorian. Dominant groups, plural. I guess that means there's multiple dominant groups. I feel like felines would maybe be the dominant group, but okay. Official currency: pound. And we even have a Victorian pound here. Look at that. The Victorian pound banknote is issued by the Bank of Victoria. I was involved throughout the entire process of designing and reviewing this set of banknotes. My efforts are imprinted on each and every one of them. Wow, that's crazy. As a £50 banknote. History. Draco's rise. There is a valley in central Terra with abundant fresh water and arable land. Leading several other tribes, one Draco tribe decided to make this incredibly fertile area their new home. The valley had then become one of the first places on Terra which people established permanent settlements. Its exceptionally natural resources and relative stable environment continued to attract migrants from across Terra over the centuries. The fusion of knowledge and culture between the natives and the migrants accelerated the development of agriculture and animal husbandry, leading to the rise of a prosperous semi-nomadic tribal confederation. The powerful Draco clan became the leaders and protectors of this confederation. As the valley's social structure solidified, challenges emerged. The loosely organized tribal confederation, made up of several governing communities with starkly different backgrounds, struggled to unite. Due to lack of coordinated aid, catastrophes inflicted heavy losses on the tribes. This phenomenon stemmed from the fact that the Dracos acted more as instructors than rulers, leaving tribes disorganized in times of crises. Family rivalry. These problems divided the elite Draco clan into two factions. One faction, known as the Royalists, believed that the Dracos should solidify their rule by establishing an aristocratic structure similar to Sargon's. The other faction, the Conservatives, advocated for maintaining the existing social structure and addressing issues through more flexible means. The growing rift between the two factions eventually led them to peacefully go their separate ways. This was quite unique for that era. As in most regions, internal tribal disagreements typically led to violent conquests. Many historians believe this peaceful resolution is directly responsible for Victoria's tradition of handling major affairs through negotiation. The Royalists declared the Valley the Kingdom of Victoria, and the Dracos a royal family. The Conservatives led several allied tribes away from the valley to a region known as Terra, where they continued their semi-nomadic lifestyle. So that's how it all began. Okay. And then that's the division between the two Draco families, as we found out, is a thing. Okay, interesting. So they were a confederation and they split off due to different views on how they wanted to form their civilization. And then the Victorians came back and conquered them. couple centuries later, probably. Sometime later, the Victorian royal family declared that as the rulers of Terra shared the same bloodline with them, they should form a sister kingdom, the Kingdom of Terra. These royalties also declared that these two kingdoms must be united as the Victorian Empire. Thus, the King of Victoria and the King of Terra were both now titles of the Empire of Victoria. Oh, okay. Records appear to indicate that the Dracos of Terra and the tribes under their rule could not understand the difference between a kingdom and an empire, nor did they realize that their Victorian kin were planning. Several Terran tribes attempted to negotiate with the Victorian envoys, but they had no experience in diplomacy. Their crude language and violent threats were intended by the Victorian royal family as a declaration of war. Thus, a civil war, which might otherwise have been avoidable, broke out. After years of conflict, the Victorians emerged victorious. The end of the war saw the Victorian Empire granting the title to the Draco ruler of Terra, King Gale. From then on, the Victorians were fully in control of the nobility structure they had created. The Kingdom of Terra was clearly a puppet state under Victoria, but the Terran people embraced it for centuries to come. So, that happened quicker than I thought. Sometime later, who knows how much later, the Victorians were like, hey, we're both Dracos, even though that one thing was like, they're clearly different. They're like, well, we're both Dracos, we might as well be both part of the same royal family. So they made 2 kingdoms under the empire, I see. The nomadic Taurans did not understand why they should kneel simply because of the one standing before them had donned a crown. It wasn't until later that they understood. The crown was merely a symbol of power. And then the Auslins arrive. After the establishment of the Empire of Victoria, she gradually stabilized her rule and became a powerful force in central Terra. Or Terra, rather. During the height of Draco influence, a branch of Auslin Padishah household left Sargon, swearing fealty to Victoria. At the time, it wasn't uncommon for nobles to switch allegiances between monarchies. The Draco saw the Auslin arrival as yet another sign of Victoria's expanding influence, and they welcomed them warmly. However, the Auslin Padishah had their own motives. At the time, the Sargonian emperor, known there as the Shashahansha of the King of Kings, had been suppressing Auslin nobles who were not in the direct line of succession to solidify his reign. These scattered nobles were struggling to seek a way to unite and increase their collective power. They eventually turned their focus away from Sargon and set their sights on Victoria. After quietly absorbing most of their scattered kin, the Auslins in Victoria rose in revolt. What followed was a palace coup and a brief civil war. The Victorian royal family, unprepared for the Auslins' well-planned maneuver, quickly buckled. Similarly, King Gale could not stop the Auslins from taking over the court. The Dracos eventually swallowed their pride and signed a treaty recognizing the Auslins as part of the royal family, making Victoria a nation co-ruled by dragons and lions. From another perspective, the Victoria's tradition of resolving things through negotiation had always limited their ruler's authority. The Draco-Auslin Treaty created a brief period of power vacuum, which gave nobles across Victoria more autonomy. Most of the common people in Victoria were unaware of the drastic changes taking place behind the heavy palace doors. However, after the Dracos ceded some of their power to the Auslins, many commoners noticed an increase in local autonomy and improvement in their quality of life, which led them to view this transfer of power as a wise and forward-thinking move, reflecting Victoria's commitment to progress. And then here we have the Draco King did not understand why this strange man could force him from the throne with just a flick of his sword. It wasn't until later the king understood. The sword was merely a manifestation of power. And Calcit writes, aside from the parts that take consequentialist view to defend Victoria, this passage is largely factual. I think it's a really interesting piece of history, though, that I've not really seen kind of described in the same way in other things. So, like, they didn't just, like, revolt and take over and dispose of the royal family, or kill the royal family, or invade from outside and conquer the country. They performed a coup, but they negotiated it so that they would just become part of the royal family. Effectively, I guess they kind of married into it in a sense. They forced them to let them marry in. But with the idea that with Terra having different races, you now have Dracos and lions, like 2 very different people that are now the same family. Very interesting. I don't know. I think it's cool. Plus, you already had 2 other Draco families that were also in charge. So now you have like this weird 3-way thing going on. Expansion, hegemony, stagnation. After the Civil War, the Victorian Empire entered her golden age. A stable society ushered in a period of economic prosperity. A remarkable number of modern farms and factories emerged, significantly boosting the employment rate. The financial sector grew rapidly. Academies full of elites made steady advancements in science and technology. Naturally, under such circumstances, the nobility set their sights on expansion, with exploration teams and armies of pioneers establishing frontier zones and enclaves far from home. All of these actions heightened tensions with neighboring countries and led to frequent border skirmishes. In 1029, Gaul declared war on Lithuania, beginning what would later be known as the War of the Four Nations. After a year of observation, Frederick III, seeing that Gaul had little chance of winning, finally decided to join the conflict. Victoria, Lithuania, and Ursus formed a coalition and launched a brutal offensive against Gaul. In October 1031, a decisive battle broke out between Gaul and the other three nations. This battle, known as the Battle of the Four Emperors, due to the presence of all four monarchs on the battlefield, ultimately ended in victory for the Allied forces, leading to the fall of the Empire of Gaul. Following the war, Victoria seized the prosperous region of Lower Gaul, acquiring vast resources, technology, and political assets. This laid the foundation for its dominance in the new era. However, Victoria's strength was short-lived. Just 40 years later, in 1072, King Alastair was deposed and executed, destabilizing Victoria's entire political system. The throne remains vacant, and powerful noble factions struggle in open hostility with one another. Fortunately, Victoria still appears strong enough to endure until the resolution of the ongoing political chaos, or perhaps until the arrival of the next era. Which isn't that's not untrue. They did survive the whole Sarkaz debacle. Over here we have the Pioneer Protest. Victoria applies different policies to each of its frontier territories, focusing on extracting resources while offering only minimal support. This approach has sparked discontent and protests along the frontier, the most notable instance being the Colombian Revolutionary War and the autonomous city of Eureka joining Rimbilliton, which occurred after the Cage incident. Interesting, okay. The frontier territories have brought Victoria immense wealth and resources, but perhaps it is now time for Victoria to adjust its approach to these regions. So, yeah, they talked about the Cage incident in game a couple times. They mentioned it here and there, which had to do with Victoria and Rimbilliton. That is interesting. It's Eureka joining Rimbilliton. I don't know. I don't remember if that's how they described it. That does imply that Rimbilliton was its own thing separately, and Eureka was in between them, I guess. Okay. Neat. And then we have Iron Duke, the war hero. At the commencement of the Battle of the Four Emperors, Corsica I commanded the Gaulish legions to launch an early offensive, briefly gaining the upper hand in the conflict. The Duke of Wellington, known as the Iron Duke, stepped forward in response. He boldly maneuvered his fleet to outflank the Gaulish forces, cutting them off from their reinforcements and severing their supply lines. This decisive move shifted the tide of battle. Outnumbered and undersupplied, the Gaulish forces were eventually overwhelmed by the coalition's superior firepower. Following the battle, the Duke of Wellington was hailed as the undisputed hero of the war. He earned a new title, the Empire's Death Knell. His accession in battle cemented his esteemed position among Victoria's nobility. The Iron Duke is much older now, but the other Grand Dukes hold him in even higher regard, and none dare cross him, except for Castor. Oh, except for Castor. Yeah, okay. Politics and military. Wow, we go through a lot of stuff. Parliament, law, aristocracy, okay. Regime. In the eyes of most, the emperor is the symbol of Victoria's pride and power. He and his brilliant crown represent Victoria's unquestionable authority. However, in reality, the Emperor of Victoria is not as powerful as most people imagine. Victoria is a constitutional monarchy, meaning the nation is governed jointly by the Emperor and Parliament. In theory, the Emperor is Victoria's head of state and chief administrator, with expansive executive, legislative, judicial, and military powers. The Emperor owns all of Victoria's land, which he grants to aristocrats as fiefdoms. In return for the right to collect income from these lands, the aristocrats are responsible for protecting and governing them on the Emperor's behalf. At the same time, the Emperor serves as the head of Parliament, a governmental organ made up of major aristocrats. These members of Parliament, MPs, govern Victoria in tandem with the Emperor, directly influencing his decisions. In doing so, the Parliament serves as a powerful check on the Emperor's power, preventing him from acting unilaterally against Victoria's best interests. This enlightened political system has long been considered one of Victoria's strengths. Since 1072, the throne has been vacant for more than 20 years. During this period, Victoria's institutions have faced many challenges, but the empire has continued to function, perhaps a testament to the system's resilience. Crown and royalty. The title of the Victorian monarch is King of Victoria, Terra, and Lower Gaul, Emperor of all Victoria. After the monarch is crowned, he retains any other noble titles he holds personally. The Victorian royal house is rather complex. Theoretically, members of the Draco family are still considered part of the royal house, even though they have long since disappeared from public view. As for the Auslins, they possess a complicated lineage, with only a handful of family members eligible to claim royal kinship. Even fewer Auslin members hold actual claims to the throne. And we have the mystery of the last emperor. In 1072, Henry Alastair Victoria, Emperor of Victoria, was executed by hanging, leaving the throne vacant, as it remains to this day. While the execution itself was public, the circumstances surrounding it were highly suspicious. It is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the modern era. Victorians and foreigners alike have speculated endlessly, but no one has produced even a lick of reliable evidence. Many who attempted to investigate have mysteriously disappeared without a trace. So if there's a lower Gaul, is there an upper Gaul? And who owns that? We still don't really know where Gaul was, I don't think. The map might list it somewhere. But yeah, I wonder where Upper Gaul is. I always assumed it was, well, it's interesting. They did say the War of Four Emperors started between Gaul and Lithuania. which actually makes me think that Gaul was bordering Litania, but I always pictured Gaul kind of southwest of Victoria, but I guess that's more where Terra is. So maybe Gaul was east of Victoria. So that would be more near Litania. That's actually... I wonder. If the map lists... That also put Gaul near, like, Laterano, which is interesting. If the map lists a Gaulish city, we would know for sure. But I always pictured it more... I always pictured it west of Victoria. Actually, I guess it can't go south because it has... There's water there. Yeah, no, okay. Calais-Blasson. The city of Calais-Blasson. I don't know where they get this information from, but the city of Calais-Blasson, former Gaulish territory, is west. So I was right. So that maybe they were west and north? Maybe that's all former Gaulish, so that was next to Litania? I don't know. That's interesting. Like, that's not the capital. We don't... The capital of Lyonnais. I don't know where that was. So, yeah. Maybe it was northwest. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out in this book. Oh, did I even... It didn't even show up on stream. There we go. Northwest. Calais-Blasson. Right up there. So maybe northwest. Anyway. Territories and divisions. All the land of the Victorian Empire belongs to the Crown, and this land is managed by the nobles through a complex feudal system. This system has existed for over 1,000 years and has been revised multiple times throughout history to adapt to changing needs. I shall provide a brief overview of the system here. Readers interested in the topic may visit their local libraries for further investigation. I can't do that, Erikson. The Victorian Empire is composed of 3 legally recognized kingdoms: the Kingdom of Victoria, the Kingdom of Terra, and the Kingdom of Lower Gaul. These kingdoms are further divided into crown lands, duchies, marquessats, if that's how that's pronounced, and viscounties. Below the duchies are counties, and below the counties are barons. Victoria claims that her emperor rules the entire Kingdom of Lower Gaul. Assuming this is accurate, Victoria controls a large portion of Gaul, a larger portion of Gaul than any other country. Control of Upper Gaul is divided between several nations. Oh, okay. It must be north. Yeah, they must have been northwest then, because who else would control Upper Gaul? I assume Litania, since they were the ones who started, well, they didn't start the war, but they were the main targets of the war, would have gotten something, right? Otherwise, they'd probably be pissed off at Victoria. So, assuming Litania got something from the war, Gaul must have been northwest. So, control of Upper Gaul is divided among several nations, not saying who. As a result, if Gaul were to be united under a single nation, Victoria would have the strongest claim. This has led to ongoing tensions with Litania and Ursus. So Ursus would be the other one. Yeah, so it was north of Victoria then. If Ursus got some... Maybe it was between Kazimierz? Maybe it was between Litania and Kazimierz? in that area? Interesting. I don't know. But yeah, probably up there then. Administratively, Victoria is divided into several counties, with nomadic cities referred to as cities and permanent settlements referred to as villages or towns. The size of these counties vary, and sometimes a fully functional nomadic city is designated as its own county. The daily operations of these administrative divisions are overseen by regional councils of varying levels. Parliament and government. The Victorian Parliament stems from her aforementioned tradition of resolution through negotiation, as well as her culture. Victoria values restraint and opposes political extremism, even if that means navigating a time-consuming and complex decision-making process to avoid any potential risks, except that time that they executed the Emperor. That was pretty politically extreme. The Emperor is the Speaker of Parliament. While major aristocrats serve as MPs, some particularly influenced aristocrats often send permanent representatives to Parliament, attending in person only the most important votes. Parliament is organized into committees focused on specific domains with legislative and administrative powers. Each of these committees appoints executives and staff to form corresponding government ministry. For example, the Victorian Health Committee and the Victorian Ministry of Health both deal with public health. The parliamentary committees formulate policy and strategy, while the government ministries handle execution and administration. The structure of regional councils, including those at the county level and below, mirror that of Parliament. However, regional councils include not only local major aristocrats, but also minor ones and influential commoners. And we have a section on Londinium here. Londinium is the political, financial, and cultural capital of Victorian Empire, as well as her most prosperous and technologically advanced city. Geographically, Londinium is by far the largest city in the empire. Each of its plates is larger than most medium-sized nomadic cities and has a distinct function, covering everything from industrial production to agricultural cultivation. The Victorians proudly claim that Londinium is the center of Terra, and in many ways this is true. However, Londinium severed all contact with the outside several years ago. All attempts to communicate with Londinium, technological or otherwise, have failed, and those bravely enough to venture into the city have been politely turned away by the soldiers stationed at its perimeter. Man, I wonder what happened there. No matter who they turn away, the walls of Londinium may well stand firm forever. The law, but not to be confused with the law. Victoria has a comprehensive, well-structured constitution. It serves as the foundation for all her other laws. Over its long history, the Victorian Constitution has been continuously amended and expanded. It is not a simple standalone text, but rather a robust governing framework composed of numerous historical documents and legal precedents. So it's not codified, right? So a codified constitution is a constitution that is its own text. A non-codified constitution is a constitution that is just made up of separate laws and texts. So in this case, yes, the Victorian is a non-codified constitution. Since Victoria is a vast empire, the major aristocrats in charge of each fiefdom reserve the right to interpret the law within their own territories, provided their interpretations do not violate the Constitution. The Victorian Parliament is the supreme legislative and judicial body in Victoria. In Parliament, legal matters are handled by the permanent judges. Victoria's chief law enforcement agency is the Royal Police of Victoria, which reports directly to the Royal House. I wonder what they do nowadays. Aristocracy. When the Empire of Victoria was founded, the Emperor granted land, power, and corresponding titles to influential individuals with shared interests to ensure their loyalty and service. These individuals formed a dominant social class we now know as the aristocrats. Over time, the privileges and obligations of the aristocrats were formalized in law, making the aristocracy a cornerstone of Victorian society. A unique feature of Victoria's aristocratic system is that all landowners ultimately serve the emperor. Even those who are vassals of other aristocrats are, by law, still vassals of the emperor, ensuring the emperor's direct control over all Victorian land. The Victorian aristocrats are divided into two categories: major aristocrats and minor aristocrats. Major aristocrats are members of the traditional noble class. They hold land and privilege, and their titles are hereditary, with their entire house enjoying noble status. Traditionally, MPs are drawn exclusively from major aristocrats. Minor aristocrats, who emerged later, receive titles more as an honorary distinction. They do not own land. Instead, they enter into contractual agreements with their feudal lords for various forms of compensation. Most minor aristocrat titles are personal and cannot be inherited. Currently, the major aristocrats are divided into 5 levels, each with distinct rights and responsibilities. Dukes, the highest rank and most powerful nobles, and the emperor's closest advisors. They hold significant military and political power, effectively controlling most of Victoria's territories. Marquises, nobles with military duties, typically in charge of border fortresses or exclave territories. Their primary responsibility is defending Victoria's land from external threat. Their roles are designed to keep them away from power centers, limiting their political influence. Earls, vassals of the dukes, they usually govern multiple small counties or one large county. They are responsible for managing minor aristocrats like barons and knights baronet. Viscounts, governors of counties. This title is adopted from the Gaulish system following Victoria's annexation of Lower Gaul and exists only in that region. Okay. Barons, the lowest tier of major aristocrats, vassals to the earls. They typically control several villages or several plots of land in a nomadic city, or perhaps small counties. The minor aristocrats emerged after the major aristocrat system had been established. Unlike major aristocrats, minor aristocrats do not receive land from their lords. Instead, they sign contracts with their feudal lords that specify the service they provide and the compensation they receive. Most minor aristocrat titles are non-hereditary, with only a few exceptions, such as barons. Victorian knights are a typical example of minor aristocrats. They provide military service to their liege, who in return pay them an annual stipend. This title are for life, but are not hereditary. And we have the 8 Grand Dukes. With the throne vacant, struggles among the Victorian nobility have intensified dramatically. Years of court intrigue and intermittent armed skirmishes have seen 8 dukes, later known as the 8 Grand Dukes, rise above the rest, gaining control over significant territory within Victoria. They are the Duke of Wellington, the Duke of Castor, the Duke of Windermere, the Duke of Normandy, the Duke of Godwin, the Duke of Abercorn, the Duke of Fife, and the Duke of Ashworth. Among them, Duke Wellington, Castor, and Windermere hold the greatest influence. While none of the dukes have explicitly declared their intentions, it is widely understood that the conflict are driven by ambition for the throne. After all, it is an outsider. If an outsider were to claim royal status, it would set a dangerous precedent, fueling the ambitions of future challengers. Water break. All right. Military. In the past, Victoria's military was centered around the aristocracy. The army consisted of the king's personal guard, forces commanded by local vassals, and militias and mercenaries conscripted during wartime. However, this traditional structure gradually became unable to meet Victoria's increasing military needs. Frederick III, one of Victoria's most famous rulers, came up with a solution. Upon his ascension to the throne, he quickly recognized that the existing army was ill-suited to the rapidly changing international landscape. After overcoming a series of political obstacles and consolidating his power, Frederick III initiated a comprehensive reform of the military, establishing a modern professional army directly commanded by the Emperor and Parliament. This newly formed Victorian army immediately demonstrated its competence during the War of the Four Nations. At its core was a highly disciplined standing army composed of professional soldiers and supported by an extensive military academy system, a conscription policy, and the most advanced weaponry and equipment. Thanks to a well-developed junior officer system, the Victorian army was highly flexible and mobile, capable of executing both complex large-scale maneuvers and smaller specialized operations. The new army's elite shock troops became known as the Tempest Platoon, a unit which emerged from the former Exemplars. This unit is tasked with carrying out special operations ordered by Parliament. Every Tempest is handpicked from the best-performing Victorian soldiers, forming a marvelously storied unit. Their feats in battle, though many are sometimes exaggerated, civilians are often starstruck when they encounter a Tempest on the streets. Frederick III's military modernization even extended to Victoria's most historic, prestigious unit, the Steam Knights. To this day, the Steam Knights remain the most powerful, capable, and loyal fighting men in the Victorian armed forces, a very symbol of Victorian military might. Only those who are physically strong, mentally sharp, resilient, and highly skilled in combat can qualify to become Steam Knights. Their armor is the apex of Victorian military technology, offering impenetrable defense, powerful propulsion, and an integrated weapon system. It dramatically enhances the wearer's combat effectiveness in every aspect. Only a powerful nation like Victoria could sustain such an elite force, given the time-consuming recruitment process and the immense cost and complexity of producing their armor. Remarkably, the number of active Steam Knights has never once in Victorian history surpassed 50. Steam Knights were widely respected, or are widely respected and feared. They are the idol of Victoria's youth and the nightmare of her enemies. To this day, Victoria's major aristocrats still maintain their own private militias. These forces are organized under the old military system and are mostly composed of minor aristocrats and commoners. The most powerful aristocrats pose advanced military equipment such as high-speed warships. Shame they're all gone. Yeah, shame Victoria, the 8 Grand Dukes crippled themselves and killed all the Steam Knights. But hey, they won in the end, so I guess it's okay. I guess it all worked out in the end. The economy. Victoria was the first nation on Terra to industrialize. Today, she is blessed with a developed, diverse industrial economy with the most advanced technology in nomadic cities, motor vehicles, and military hardware. Victoria's agriculture, animal husbandry, forestry, and mining industries have also been mechanized at scale, a highly mechanized society indeed. However, their reliance on traditional machinery has led to a new problem. In recent years, Victoria has neglected the emerging fields of electronics, causing her to lag behind other nations in this area. Victoria's vibrant economy and thriving domestic trade gave rise to a variety of commercial contracts and agreements, which formed the framework for the modern corporate system we know today. This continued economic growth has made Victoria home to Terra's most comprehensive financial industry, with fully established sectors such as banking, insurance, trust, and securities. And this little thing we have here, average lowest long-term annual interest rate of Victoria's commercial banks. We have the War of Four Nations, which was the highest it's ever been. After the war, it immediately dropped to the lowest. Victoria's economy has remained remarkably stable over the past century, except for a brief period during the War of the Four Nations. Or I guess at the start of the war, it was highest, but by the end of the war, it was its lowest. But the interest rate otherwise has pretty much stayed around 5%. 4.5. I want to be more accurate. I don't know if that shows up well in this. Again, that light green color is not great. Culture and society. The current population of Victorian Empire, we're getting population numbers, is approximately 40 million. Okay, huge. Okay, so Victoria's got 40 million. More than half of which live in nomadic cities. For most Victorians, their citizenship is simply a piece of paper. Only a small minority of highly educated citizens develop a sense of identity as Victorians, which in most cases is a strong, fervent one. Now, I don't think Victoria is the most populous, but they are probably one of the most populous, I would imagine. So numbers probably won't be much higher than that. So population of Terra, if we extrapolate that, is several hundred million. I'm not sure if it's reached a billion yet. It might not have. More than half of the 40 million live in cities, nomadic cities. So if we did like 30 million live in cities, depending on how many nomadic cities they have, that does mean that there's probably millions of people in a nomadic city. So that also answers that question. There are three main traditional Victorian social classes: the aristocrats, the commoners, and the sages. The aristocrats include all 5 tiers of major aristocracy, who qualify to serve as MPs, as well as the minor ones, ones such as the knights and the gentry. Commoners include all ordinary citizens and farmers, while sages refer to those who, since ancient times, have used their vast wisdom to guide other citizens and facilitate industrial/agricultural production. Following the dawn of the Crystal Age, however, the role of the sages as a class has largely been replaced by the modern education system. The term sage is no longer widely used. Overall, Victorian society remains both confident and restrained. Victorians believe strongly in rationality and morality. The pursuit of knowledge is the central theme of Victorian social life, with science being a favorite topic of casual conversation. Based on scientific principles, Victoria establishes well-rounded primary and higher education systems. Victorian art has also flourished in its environment. People often discuss science and art together. Many aim to explore new possibilities in art through the scientific method. In fact, this is exactly how the Victorians developed the motion picture industry. Victoria's high level of industrialization has exacerbated her oropathy problem. In most parts of Victoria, infected individuals are typically isolated or detained in areas controlled by civil authorities. Harboring infected individuals is considered a serious crime. In recent years, some aristocrats have experimented with new policies for handling the infected, allowing them to work as laborers in certain facilities. However, the wages they receive is far below standard. So we have the King's Wand. In the modern period, where even the word sage is fading away, a small organization of young people has caught my attention. They are bold, combative, reckless, and arrogant, yet their mission is to carry on the legacy of the ancient sages, using their knowledge and skills to help those in need. What's more, they have actually succeeded a few times. The name of this organization is King's Wand, a term in ancient times referred to the sages who advised the kings. Perhaps they will prove that there is still a place for sages in modern society. I don't know if King's Wand, it has been mentioned in game. I was wondering, I feel like that maybe was a thing. I don't remember though. It was. Skyfire is a part of it. Also, so is Angst. What? The Savra Angst that was mentioned is actually mentioned in game as well. He's a part of it. That's fun. Yeah, so the Savra, I know a Victorian Savra, Mr. Angst of Caledon. He's also a member of the King's Wands. That's cool. He was he apparently appeared but was unseen in A Light Spark in Darkness, apparently. But yeah, the wiki page for the King's Wand. The King's Wand is a student group comprising of 5 members. Only 5 members, apparently. Whose goal is to bring equality to the infected. Which, yeah, the light, spark, and darkness was like Skyfire was in that, so that must like they must have talked about that more. That was many years ago, though. I don't remember. Thanks, though. That's really cool. And down here we have a welfare report on infected workers at a Victorian factory. The workers themselves haven't the slightest clue what the health management subsidy listed on the report means. They can only tell me that one name frequently appearing on the report belongs to a man who passed away long ago. So let's see, it's got names on the left, first name, last name, their like worker ID, and then it lists it's a calendar for their oropathy inhibitor medicine, and it has like a footprint on it. Victoria's troubles. There is a widely held opinion that in terms of overall national strength, Victoria is the most powerful nation on Terra. 30 years ago, I might have agreed with this sentiment, but times have changed and power dynamics are shifting. Victoria once proudly claimed to be the most advanced nation in each and every aspect. However, by clinging to her current advanced infrastructure, she has ossified and fallen behind in some certain sectors. Take Victorian mechanics and electronics, for example. At the dawn of the Crystal Age, Victorian machine science developed faster than any other nation. However, Victoria's ensuing reliance on her existing machinery very nearly led to her missing the rise of electronics. To this day, Victoria still struggles to mass-produce high-precision electronic components. This phenomenon is not unique to science. The complex web of Victorian aristocracy, bureaucracy, and parliamentarians is far less efficient than the Yinni civil service. Victoria's military reforms were less comprehensive than those of Ursus, limiting the military's overall scale and flexibility. Meanwhile, the financial instruments first invented in Victoria have been applied and developed far more efficiently in places like Colombia and Kazimierz. Simply put, Victoria has forgotten that the tide of progress pushes all forward together. She may remain basking in her glory, but Victoria is still standing as other nations gain ground, or is standing still rather, as other nations gain ground. The current state of Victoria is not promising either. The Empire, whose throne has remained vacant for over 2 decades, has managed to retain her great power status on inertia alone. However, the pressure that has accumulated over these 2 decades weighs heavily on every Victorian. The headless crown is like a beacon in the dark, luring ambitious dukes into conflict with one another. After all, if the Red Dragon's Londinium could accept a Lion King, then the throne surely is open to all. Meanwhile, old disputes are resurfacing. The Taurans rise their ancient banners, seeking justice for all they have suffered. In recent years, many Victorians living abroad have felt abandoned by the state, same as the Taurans. Victoria's borders are no longer stable. Territorial disputes over Gaul are escalating and tensions with neighboring countries are rising, especially Lithuania. To make matters worse, as we enter this new century, the Empire's economic engine is stalling, and the question of whose flag flies over Londinium lies unanswered. Never before has the Victorian Empire faced such extensive and profound challenges. As the once glorious Victoria now shows signs of decline, one must wonder, is she merely obscured by dark clouds, or is the sun finally setting on the Empire? Only time will tell. Let us hope that if and when changes come, each and every soul is ready. Conclusion. The Grand Stage. The Grand Stage of Victoria has welcomed all manner of drama and the dazzling era of the Lion Kings, which has lasted over a century. Ending more than 20 years ago, Victoria endures. She will forever stand, witnessing every rise and fall just as she has throughout history. Actually get a section on Terra, which is cool. How long is this section? That's like a... I guess this is actually technically... those are two subsections of Victoria, because it's 1.1 and then there's a 1.2. Four pages. And then we move on to another country. We'll finish this then. Finish Victoria. Completely. Chapter 5.11. Terra. Seek tomorrow and you'll find yesterday. I'm not going to try and pronounce the Irish. Declaration. When you seek tomorrow, you'll find yesterday. Old Taran proverb. The rise, or the risk of a rift between Victoria and the new Taran regime is a contentious and evolving issue. Some scholars argue that it is inevitable, others disagree, in the interest of accuracy, and I choose to express my thoughts on the subject with caution, and let the future incarnation of mine document and assess modern Terra. Further, attentive readers may notice significant differences between the history of Terra presented here and the content in Victoria. For Victorian readers, this version may be closer to the Terra they are familiar with. I recommend that readers approach both versions with equal critical scrutiny. A brief history of the region, alternative version. You are planting a feather in the ground, imagining it growing into a foul beast. Seamus Williams, Taran poet. We all know Seamus, that's for sure. Calcit has a lot of thoughts on this. In the Victorian language, Terra, referred to as Temhach or Temer and Tenge, was originally a word used by ancient nomads to refer to a meeting place. Today, it typically refers to a geographical region in south of Victoria, which fluid boundaries that shift as the nomadic cities march along their routes. It is generally accepted that Taran civilization began with the Sargonian expansion. We also know that around the year 100 before the Terran calendar BTC, Terra was taken over by nomadic Draco families from Victoria who spoke Tenga. I don't remember how that was pronounced. Tengai or Tenge, something like that. It is commonly believed that the kingdoms of Victoria and Terra merged in order to resist the Knights More and Hagen, forming what later became the Victorian Empire. The king of Terra ceded the title of Ritaha, king, to the Victorian monarch, who in return bestowed him the title of Rina Gale, King Gale, which these days, the title Gale is often believed to be the king's personal name. This is incorrect. These two kings ruled Terra together until the 9th century, when the Dracos abdicated the throne and the Austins replaced them. King's Gale bloodline then died out, and the governance of Terra's political affairs fell into the Grand Dukes, as it remains today. After the War of Four Nations, Terra has been ruled by Duke of Wellington to this day. This is completely different than what he talked about earlier. He really was like, yeah, this is the this is what the Victorians are taught, I guess, but this is completely different than the history of Victoria he was talking about earlier. So Attentive readers may notice significant difference between the history of Terra presented here and the content in Victoria. The Victorian readers, this version may be closer to the Terra they are familiar with. Interesting. Okay. Unfortunately, much of Terran history and culture has been lost, partly because it was passed down orally and not written, and partly due to the deliberate destruction of written documentation. Most of what we know about Terra was rediscovered by scholars working at universities and museums in Londinium. Evidence of Kingsgale lineage is fragmented and scattered. Only a few recognized stories, such as those of Myred the Exquisite and Labreach the Exiled, Labreach or whatever, we know that guy, have been reconstructed from folk tales and archaeological digs. We have not uncovered any artifacts corresponding to any of the other kings of Terra's oral history. Modern Terra has been stagnant. The other northern Grand Dukes before the Duke of Wellington were reluctant to invest resources in Terra, likely because cultural differences and practical challenges made governing the region difficult. Meanwhile, the rapid growth of the northern oranginium industry has drained the region's natural resources and population. Victorians living in Terra receive wages and public services far below the national average, yet they often pay higher prices for industrial goods. Moreover, the communication between Terra and the other parts of Victoria tends to be one-sided and inefficient. By the 1070s and 1080s, an increasing number of Terrans were advocating for independence from Victoria as a means of improving their harsh living conditions. Although public opinion polls suggest that the pushes for Terran independence remain infrequent and limited in scope, history shows that such movements have precedence on Terra, and Victoria cannot afford to ignore the issue. Would an independent Terra choose to restore its monarchy or establish a new modern state? How would she fulfill the people's hopes to revive their culture and improve their lives? These are inquiries that pique my interest the most, and I believe that they are issues society ought to regard with greater concern. So, Calcit. What's Calcit saying about this? This passage, in contrast to the previous one, largely reflects the official Victorian perspective, most of which is not factual. The scepter of the King of Terra is a Victorian fabrication, and the merger was essentially a conquest. The cooperation between the Gaelic leaders and Victoria was merely a compromise under the pressure of sword and blade, and the claim that the bloodline then died out is entirely fictional. However, it is true that the Emperor of Victoria once held a title in Terran language, and Terra is indeed now the domain of the Duke of Wellington. From this, we can understand that one should not fully discuss any historical account without proper investigation. And then the second thing is, this passage seems more subtle than the section on Victoria. It still implies the following reality: Terra is a region that was forcibly incorporated into the Victorian Empire with cultural traditions entirely different from those of Victoria over the course of several centuries, especially after the expansion of the Dracos. Regardless of motivation, Victoria has systematically eroded Terra's cultural heritage, undermining the dignity of both spiritual and material of the Terrans, and even the ordinary Victorians who chose to move to Terra. The modern Terran identity had to be violently reconstructed, which can be seen as a consequence of Victoria's entire approach. Call him out, Calcit. Kind of crazy that Erikson, like, after all the revisions he did, this one he's just like, yeah, we're just going to use the standard Victorian history of Terra, even though it completely is contradicted by the Victorian history section. I've lost some respect for Erikson with this one, gonna be honest. Lost some respect there. Helping to perpetuate false history and propaganda on that. Even though he acknowledges that, like, yeah, there is other ways, but he's just like, I'm not gonna try and actually give you the right information. And then we have a section on the language, though. Tenge, broken Tauren is better than fluent Victorian. New Tauren proverb. Today, Tenge is commonly referred to as Tauren or Gaelic, and its etymology can be traced back to the original Draco word for tongue. Although Tenge and Victorian both originate from the same mother language, they have very different grammar systems. Oh, hey, we're going to talk about some linguistics? Okay. Tenge's basic verb-subject-object sentence structure is a regional anomaly, clearly retaining many classical Sargonian grammar patterns. Since the beginning of recorded history, Tenge has used a Victorian script. The ancient nomadic Tauren people developed a rich spoken language with a diverse phonetic system. There were once dozens of dialects, though all have now been lost. During the early reign of King Gale, Victorians in Tara were encouraged to abandon use of Tenge and adopt the more widely spoken Victorian and Gaulish tongues. Written records in Tenge ceased being between the 8th and 9th centuries by the turn of this century. There were essentially no remaining Victorians who could speak the Tenge we know from historical texts. Only a few Tenge words survive in the Victorian dialect spoken in Tara. However, with the rise of the independence movement, local scholars, writers, and poets have begun putting more efforts into reviving the language, and they have achieved some solid results. As mentioned, there is a long oral tradition in Tara by which stories are passed down through the generations. Today, these tales are all told in Victorian. Perhaps someday we may once again hear them in their original Tenge. Only time will tell. However, with the revival of Tenge, a new phenomenon has emerged. People who left Tara between 1096 and 1098 report growing hostility between Tenge Tauren speakers and their neighbors who speak only Victorian. What started as a political difference between separatists and the government may now be developing into a broader social division in Tara. If this is indeed the case, it is a cause of concern for any potential future Tauren government, as well as the people living in the region. Kauta says, if we compare the author's depictions of Tara and Victoria, we see significant differences in the method of documentation, choice of reference material, and the emotional tone of writing. These discrepancies may have been intentional or purely accidental. In any case, the objective reality shows us that even in the face of Orangenian catastrophe or the cosmos and the mighty sea, humanity continues to anguish, rage, and struggle, not for the present, but for the past. However, I cannot offer further judgment on this, as I may be caught up in the same struggle myself. This does bring a lot of interesting questions about language development on Terra. So obviously this is a reference to, they're like, okay, so obviously this is Irish and Victorian is English. And yeah, Irish is verb, subject, object. They both descend from a mother language, which would be Proto-Indo-European in real life. They talk about the verb, subject, object is an anomaly, which it is. It retains classical Sargonian grammar patterns, which in real life I would assume refers to like Arabic, which is also usually verb, subject, object, although they are not related languages in real life. We have... It did say that over here in this version of history, which I don't know how true it is. It says Terran civilization began with Sargonian expansion. So it's possible that the language was influenced by classical Sargonian grammar, which is definitely a possibility there. But it does make me wonder, like, technically all the languages would be pulled from Oranginium. Did they actually develop separately again? Like, was there an actual Proto-Indo-European that then actually split off into Victorian and Terran? Or did they develop just kind of out of thin air? Or are all Terran languages related technically? How does that work? I think it's implying that there was a mother tongue that they did speak, so there was some sort of proto-language before it split off. Obviously, time hasn't progressed as far as in real-life human history, but language can still change pretty quickly. But it would have been, and probably like the gap between Proto-Indo-European and Irish and English is much bigger, much bigger than the gap that probably exists between Victorian and Terran, even though they are, because they're based after English and Irish, are like very different languages, but seemingly more closely related to some extent. Interesting thoughts. And then we have this short little chapter 5.1.2, The Great Excavation in the Mad King's Moving Castle. Don't know what this is. Recently, traditional art and archaeology have gained popularity in Victoria, especially among the nobility, who are keen to showcase their interest in art and history. This trend has brought steady funding to research in these fields, with museums, universities, and the Royal Academy of Sciences becoming favored institutions for sponsorship and collaboration. Naturally, the noble names often appear in project acknowledgements. Objectively, this wave of sponsorship is beneficial as it has significantly advanced the field of archaeology. After the War of the Four Nations and the fall of Gaul, much of Gaulish history or historical research was inherited by Victoria and Lithuania. However, the chaotic administrative handover severely hindered progress in Gaul's archaeological research. Thanks to generous financial support, Victorian archaeologists were finally able to conduct large-scale excavations in Lower Gaul, leading to remarkable discoveries and sparking a major debate on the history of nomadic cities. One of the most important archaeological findings in Lower Gaul is the designed manuscript of the Moving Castle, now housed in the Royal Museum of Victoria. This manuscript, originally untitled, bears the signature of a mysterious figure referred to as King Charles. To uncover the origin of King Charles, scholars scoured historical texts and finally found a reference to a Gaulish figure known as Charles the Mad. According to existing records, Charles was a king of a small, now forgotten polity in ancient Gaul. He was indifferent to power and governance, but an exceptionally skilled architect and user of Oranginium arts. During his reign, he launched a massive construction project to build a grand palace, forcing his people into labor and draining the nation's resources. He hired experts at skyrocketing prices from across Terra, to work on the project. Eventually, he was either overthrown by the angry masses or his weakened kingdom was conquered by a neighboring nation. The truth remains obscure. In any case, Charles the Mad and his palace vanished from history. Historians believe that there was a reason for these vaguenesses in the historical accounts of this period, and they eventually unveiled the secret of that very manuscript. The project was not merely a palace, but a mobile fortress that moved via some sort of traction system. Thus, scholars have dubbed it the moving castle. The castle had two main parts, the main structure and the traction device. The main structure itself was also split into two layers, the upper castle and the lower mobile platform. The upper castle level used orangenium-enhanced materials to minimize weight while maintaining functionality. Many of its parts were designed to be hollow. The entire structure resembled a delicate yet lightweight cage. The lower section consisted of a massive track-based mobile platform. The traction mechanism itself represented a bold attempt at utilizing orangenium. Unlike later Victorian steam technology, which used orangenium as fuel and water vapor as a power source, the manuscript's author designed an engine powered purely by orangenium. The system and its auxiliary devices only required a constant supply of orangenium fuel to remain operational. Of course, the drawbacks of such a system are obvious. It would have expelled a large amount of unfiltered orangenium waste, resulting in severe pollution. No actual pieces of the moving castle have ever been excavated, which has led to much speculation among scholars. Some argue that the castle was never completed. Others countered that if it were true, there would have been remnants of the construction near where the manuscript was found. Thus, they argue the castle must have been moved to an as yet undiscovered location. Still, others believe that the project was likely destroyed during construction due to some unforeseen issue or issues. The debate over the relationship between the moving castle and modern nomadic cities has now entered a new phase. Most historians argue that the concept of the moving castle likely inspired the development of nomadic technology. While there is no direct evidence to suggest that the designers of the Seven Cities Federation who built the first modern nomadic city borrowed from King Charles' manuscript, the two concepts are thought to share a common lineage. Most engineers, on the other hand, argue that by today's standards, the design of Charles the Mad would not meet even the most basic criteria, and that a massive project would not have been possible with the materials available at the time. Furthermore, no other copies of the manuscript have ever been found, making it unlikely that this design directly influenced later invention. Thus, modern nomadic cities likely stem from some other separate innovation. Despite differing opinions on the practicality of the moving castle, there is unanimous admiration for the idea itself. At some point in history, someone in Lower Gaul dreamed of this grand vision: an enormous engine, roaring day and night, spewing black smoke, pulling a mystical castle toward a distant land untouched by catastrophe. Yeah, probably unrelated. I would imagine, maybe it was destroyed, maybe it wasn't finished, maybe it moved somewhere. Maybe they never built it. Maybe they just drafted it. There's plenty of that sort of thing. Plenty of, historical manuscripts of ideas that were, revolutionary and very imaginative, but no one built it. But that is the end of that. Next chapter will be Litania, which should be fun. It's a long one. Very long one. We will I don't know when we'll be back with this. Unlikely next week, to be honest. Unlikely. Since there's other things to catch up on, and then there's an Arknights event. But we will be back at some point. Also unlikely that there will be a stream tomorrow. Just because, again, the monitor isn't here yet. Next week is Wong. Yep, it is. And Chen. Don't forget about Chen. I actually don't hear anyone talk about Chen. I see stuff about Wong. I don't know anything about Chen. She looks cool though, art-wise. That is all for today. Thank you all for watching. And until we meet again, may the sands of time treat you well.